Hey y'all, I just wanted to jump on and talk to you about pigeon pose or Eka Pada Rajakapotasana. I have a lot of feelings about pigeon pose, as you're about to find out. So this is a posture that requires a massive amount of flexibility in external rotation of one hip, and then on the other side in our hip flexors. Now you may know it from like your yin classes. It features really heavily in like your vinyasa classes, and I wanted to jump on and talk about why we may choose or may choose not to practice our pigeon and what we can maybe do instead if it's something that doesn't really suit you. So some contraindications or some things we might be wary of before we practice our pigeon poses if we've got ankle issues, knee issues, hip issues, or lower back issues. So we usually enter from our hands and knees or from our downward facing dog. It usually we move into it working, I'm stepping with my left leg, I take that ankle behind my right wrist and we kind of lower ourselves down from there. Coming into this posture, we can modify here by either bringing the foot in to take a little bit of torque off that hip or keeping it shin parallel to the top of the mat to amp up the external rotation a little bit. From there, we start to lower the hips down. We look at lowering the hips down kind of evenly, and that's where that big amount of flexibility comes into the front of that hip. If you're missing the flexibility in your left hip in external rotation, your knee and your ankle joint kind of compensate for you. And if you're missing the flexibility in the front of your right hip, your lower back kind of jams and compensates there. Some options from here, sometimes we can strengthen through the kind of back body, our spinal erector muscles, and stand ourselves up. Sometimes you'll see variations where you lift the back foot, grab on, we can take overhead binds. A lot of the time what we do is kind of relax down into it, chill out on the elbows, head in hands, or even resting the head on the floor. What I don't like about that is that the one element of this posture that could make it really beneficial is kind of strengthening ourselves in that position is taken out of it when we just relax into it. And like I mentioned before, we're just putting a lot of torque, a lot of passive range into our ankle, knee and hip. A really good way to kind of test if your hip is ready for this amount of external rotation is come into something like your Sukhasana. So your cross-legged pose, and I'm going to take my front leg and I'm going to pick it up and we're going to come into like a half lotus shape, or you can even take that fire log pose, and we want to pop that ankle on top of the knee. And if you notice your knee is kind of popping up a little bit like this and you have a real hard time bringing that leg down, if you pop lots of weight onto it, that is essentially what your pigeon pose is. And if your hip is refusing to move, like I mentioned before, your knee is going to be taking that movement and your ankle is going to be taking that movement. And it's just not fair to kind of pop your entire body weight on that and then try to relax into it. All we're going to be doing is creating laxity in the outer ligaments of the ankle and the outer ligaments of the knee. So some alternatives for our pigeon pose. I really like figure 4. I include it a lot in my classes. It's a really great stretch for our piriformis muscle. So if you do feel tight through the glutes, this is one that I really love to do. So we start sitting on our butt, feet about hips distance apart. And what I really love about this is it's so easy to tailor to the person who is like performing this shape. I like to start kind of in this hammock shape, leaning back into the hands. We're sticking with our left leg today, so let's stay with that. I'm going to pick up my front leg and place that ankle over the top of the knee. So if I have trouble doing that, what I can do is lean back a little bit and extend my foot out a little bit more, and that makes my knee a little bit easier to access. You can always give yourself a little bit of a hand there as well. And if you're looking to feel a little bit more sensation, we do the opposite. We start to walk the hands in, or you can start to step the foot in, really kind of open up the chest, roll the shoulder blades back until you find that nice kind of sensation. We can keep this active, like I said, by pulling the shoulder blades together and gently pressing the knee forward, working on that active range and keeping this ankle flexed. So any of your external hip openers, like your pigeon or your Padmasana, lotus, half lotus, it's a really nice thing to do to keep this ankle active, keep the foot flexed, so we're protecting that ankle. Another option, if you're in your vinyasa class or whatever and your teacher says, cool, let's jump into pigeon, and you're not actually that comfortable, hopefully you've had a chat to them and let them kind of know what your needs are prior to the class. But if you're there and you don't want to stand out too much and you want to kind of follow along with the sequence, a really nice thing to do is coming from that tabletop position or from your downward facing dog, is just stepping that knee straight forward, and rather than taking the foot to the opposite wrist, we just sit it directly kind of underneath our butt here. So we're sitting back on our heels, kind of like this. We step our opposite leg out backwards. We can still tap into that beautiful kind of hip flexor stretch. And you can follow with the rest of the class. You're just not putting that extra torque on the hip, the knee, or the ankle. Again, we can have ourselves resting on our arms, resting on our elbows, or lifting ourselves up. So if you are still looking to get into your pigeon pose, and I just feel like there's no wrong shapes for the body. So if it's something that you want to practice and you want to get into, I think that's a really cool thing to explore that. It's just knowing how to do it safely and being kind to your body, not kind of looking to force your hips into a certain shape just because everybody else is doing it. So some really cool things to do to strengthen that kind of active external rotation, so you can stay activated and you can stay strong in this shape rather than just relaxing and flopping into it. Something I really like to do is I start with a block, and then as you find more rotation in the hip, you can bring yourself down to the floor. I'm not down to the floor, and I don't care too much if I get there or not, to be perfectly honest. So I'm going to take this block under my knee, come into that kind of stag shape or that 90-90 shape, and pressing my knee down into my block, I flex that foot, and just gently, I see if I can move or rotate kind of my thigh around to pick that foot up off the floor. Now you see, it's a tiny movement. I was not blessed with a lot of external rotation in my hips naturally, which is totally cool. You might find that you get a little higher than me. And just picking it up and lowering it down. Picking it up and lowering it down. Another beautiful one to do is that figure 4 stretch that we went over before. The next one is sitting in that 90-90 shape, so you feel like you've got 90-degree angles kind of at your knees, at your ankles, and we think about turning ourselves over that front leg, and we can start keeping the back nice and straight, nice and long, just walking ourselves forward, trying to see if we can get that knee kind of close to the floor. Now, as we flop forward, it's not just a matter of kind of coming here and relaxing, kind of working like you're not actually putting too much weight in your hands. So as you lean forward, you've got to press that foot, press that knee, press that shin down into the ground to kind of stop you from collapsing forward. So lots of pressing down through that foot, through that shin, and then a big press down to bring yourself back up. And you can try that on both sides. And so in terms of preparing yourself for your pigeon, we have done a lot for external rotation in the hips. But in terms of working the other side of the stretch, or our hip flexors, a really nice thing to do is jump into your low lunge. Now, I love low lunges with 90-degree angles. Not a massive fan of coming forward too far like this. There's nothing wrong with it, but in terms of finding that openness through the hip flexor, I tend to find, you'll see I've got a big bend in my lower back. It's easy to compensate. So we come through that 90-90 shape. Think about pulling like pubic bone up to the chin and pointing your tailbone down at that back knee. pulling that front foot, kind of sticking it down into your mat and drawing it towards you as you tuck the hips under. And it's like you're trying to pull your hips forward without sinking forward. Lots of activation, lots of strength, looking for that beautiful feeling of lengthening in the front of that thigh, front of that hip. And then as you start to feel comfortable there, you might start to bend a little bit more into that knee, but whilst keeping that activation, that strength through the lower belly, length through the lower back, still really pulling through the front foot. Almost like you're trying to scissor the legs together. Another one of my favorite things to do in terms of feeling length through the quads, through the hip flexors, is exactly the same thing. We're going to take our back foot up a wall. A really nice thing to do is cushion underneath that back knee. And again, exactly the same thing. We tuck the hips under as much as we can. Pubic bone to chin, tailbone points down to the back of the knee, finding that length, coming forward if need be. So that was just a really quick 11 minutes of me talking about ways that you can get into your pigeon pose, a couple options if you're not feeling your pigeon pose, and just reassessing why you want to get into it, why you want to be practicing it. And yeah, I think it's a really good thing to question what you're doing in your practice, question whether it feels beneficial and nourishing and awesome for your body. And that's it. That's all I got. I did not think of an outro at the beginning of this video, so I don't have one and I'm just talking. But let's move on. Hope you all have a great day.